Chapter 13. That night at dinner, Harry found himself unable to eat. As a growing preteen boy, he found this to be quite worrisome. Fortunately, Harry also deduced that this was because of the nauseating celebration that was occurring at the Gryffindor table. Between Hermione's rapid-fire answers to Professor Sprout's herbology questions and his own punishment for not taking Lockhart's quiz seriously, they had already netted 90 points. Combined with the rest of the house, Gryffindor was up 112 points from that morning. Only Snape looked as sick as Harry felt. Deciding there was no reason he had to partake in these festivities, he stormed off to the Ravenclaw table in protest and plopped down in front of a surprised Luna Lovegood. "Hello, is anything the matter?" she asked curiously. "It's only the first day of school and Gryffindor already has an 80-point lead in the House Cup and it's all my fault," Harry moaned. "I see. I've always thought that the desire to win that was indicative of the presence of Raxpert myself, but no one ever believes me," Luna confided. "That's because Dumbledore's got them too well indoctrinated," Harry explained. "He's making them think it's about house pride and proving that your house is better than the others, which is really quite detrimental to the concepts of school unity, if you think about it." "Exactly," Luna beamed. "Thus, Raxperts. Why are you sitting here?" "I had to get away from that," Harry gestured disgustedly over at the celebration. "Was that butterbeer he saw?" "But why here?" "I heard last year when the House Cup was awarded to Gryffindor at the last minute, you went over by the Slytherins." "Well, I'm kind of avoiding Draco," Harry admitted. Seeing as how he had defense against the dark arts this morning and no doubt saw that, once again, that rumor about his mother and Snape that I accidentally started just won't die. And besides, why not sit here? I like you. "We only met yesterday," Luna pointed out. "Ah, but what a meeting it was. I ordered that subscription of the Quibbler you recommended. I can't wait to hear about the things the Ministry is hiding from us so I can be properly outraged. But let's talk about you. Are the other Ravenclaws treating you okay?" Luna nodded. "Oh yes. They seem to think that I'm under your protection or something because of last night and I expect that after tonight they'll think that even more. They haven't even laughed at any of my theories once. I'm thinking of coming up with progressively more outlandish ones to see how long before they crack." "Now that is a noble goal," Harry laughed. "See, I knew there was a reason I liked you. We're both lone warriors in the fight against sheep mentality." "I like sheep," Luna told him. "So do I, but when people like them so much they decide to think like them, they do all sorts of crazy things like declaring I'm the next Dark Lord," Harry countered. "It must be the Raxperts," Luna suggested. "Ah yes, the Raxperts wreaking havoc yet again and trying to blame it on the poor sheep," Harry shook his head sadly. "And that's going in next week's Quibbler. Thanks, Harry." "Harry. A word, if I may," Lockhart said, intercepting Harry on his way to breakfast the next morning. Harry's friends looked concerned, but he just waved them off. He could handle himself. And if worse came to worse, he didn't want his friends to see him do some damage control. What, with it not being ethical and him being a second year and all? "Yes, Professor?" Harry asked politely. "I wanted to talk to you about your quiz yesterday," Lockhart continued. "It wasn't anything from my books, of course, but still it was all quite amusing. Some of your answers did make me wonder, however. What exactly do you know about Dash?" "Your habit of tracking down well-meaning but publicity-shy individuals who rid their local populace of whatever form of magical creature ails them and obviating them." Harry finished. Looking rather gobsmacked, Lockhart just nodded wordlessly. "Well, it's certainly not very nice. Still, if they had wanted the credit, they would have publicized their exploits better before you had time to hear of it and track them down," Harry replied. "There's nothing I could do to change the fact that you stole those people's memories and their accomplishments, and since Professor Dumbledore believes in unlimited second chances, he wouldn't do anything about it even if I told him. So, basically, as long as you don't try to obviate me or one of my friends, I don't really plan on doing anything. Oh, and if you try to steal one of my accomplishments, I will beat you to death with a paper napkin." "Can you beat someone to death with a paper napkin?" Lockhart asked, intrigued and not at all bothered by Harry's threat. Harry shrugged. "I'll have fun trying." "What's that funny clicking noise?" Fred asked in the middle of Quidditch practice that Saturday morning. "Oh, that's just Colin, my personal photographer," Harry explained. "Why do you need a personal photographer?" George asked, unsure if Harry was being serious or not. "Well, I figure that since Colin is clearly going to keep following me around and taking pictures of me and since I'm really not that interesting Dash." Fred snorted at that but Harry dutifully ignored him. "I felt bad that he was wasting so much of his time, so I figured I might as well pay him. Besides, I set up a deal with the Daily Prophet and anytime they do a story featuring me, they'll just contact Colin and he can send them the appropriate photo." As the twins continued to stare at him, he elaborated, "I got the idea from Lockhart. Man's a media genius." "I suppose he'd almost have to be good at something," George mused. "And it's certainly not teaching," Fred contributed. "What's going on?" Wood frowned as he flew by to see why his seeker and beaters had suddenly stopped practicing. "Is that first year spying on us?" "Oh, no, that's just Harry's photographer," Fred said cheerfully. "So I guess that would probably put him in Gryffindor. Besides, the Slytherin team apparently couldn't find anybody to spy as they showed up in person. And full Quidditch gear," George remarked. Why in the world are they wearing their Quidditch robes to practice in? Harry asked, confused. That has got to be the stupidest thing I've seen all day. All day isn't very long, Harry, Fred pointed out as they went down to meet the rival team. It can't be more than 10 and we were listening to Oliver ramble about how he wants us to win the cup again this year and next year. Seeing Harry tense up, he quickly clarified, the Quidditch Cup, Harry, the Quidditch Cup. He couldn't care less about the House Cup. Oh, that's all right then, Harry said, calming down. And yesterday afternoon Parvati and Lavender called me in to help them figure out who in our year is most skin tone compatible with them. I swear, one of these days I'm going to just buy Witch Weekly and force them to stop printing such inane articles that force poor innocent schoolchildren to undergo 2 hours of that sort of torture. You do that, Harry. Flint! Wood yelled. This is our practice time. We got up specifically. You can clear off now. Plenty of room for all of us, Wood, Flint said innocently. But I booked the pitch. Wood protested, his face turning a most interesting shade of purple that Harry was quite certain wasn't a good thing. I booked it. Ah, Flint said brightly. I see why there might be some confusion then. You booked the pitch and I got a note signed by Professor Snape saying, I, Professor S. Snape, give the Slytherin team permission to practice today on the Quidditch pitch, owing to the need to adjust to their new brooms. Wouldn't it have been easier to just book the pitch like a normal person? Harry asked reasonably. Flint flushed. Well, I would have, except this week has been kind of hectic, with Newt review and everything and so it just slipped my mind so I asked Professor Snape at the end of potions yesterday. You've got new brooms? Wood asked, distracted. What kind? Our seeker, Draco Malfoy, was concerned that the team wasn't living up to its full potential and so his father bought the team Nimbus 2001s, Flint said proudly. Oh, that's good, Harry sighed, relieved. Everyone looked at him like he was crazy. He didn't care, though. That had been happening quite frequently since he had come back. Good? Good? You think it's good that the Slytherin team now possesses 7 of the fastest brooms out there? Wood asked disbelievingly. Well, yes, Harry replied. Otherwise it was going to be really awkward when Professor Dumbledore announced that I had bought the Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff team 7 Nimbus 2001s each. More staring. Really, he might as well be talking to himself for how much input everyone else was giving him. And now Ron, Hermione, and Neville were coming over to see what the fuss was about. Would they have any more to say than his teammates? Doubtful. Why didn't you buy the Slytherin team any brooms? Draco asked, suddenly offended. I mean, you had no way of knowing that I was going to do it. Oh yes he did. And that was why he'd bothered to go even the playing field, because he didn't want to listen to everyone complaining about favoritism when he knew they'd have all bought themselves top-of-the-line brooms if they could afford them. Well, Harry said, thinking quickly. I didn't feel that last year's games against Cedric and Cho were much of a test of my ability because on my broom could outfly their brooms any day of the week. In order to have more of a challenge, I decided to get them faster brooms. Knowing that the rest of their team would give them a hard time about accepting a gift from a rival seeker and there would be talk of them throwing matches, I bought the rest of them brooms, too. And I couldn't possibly put Gryffindor at such a disadvantage by giving 2/3 of our competition state-of-the-art brooms and not giving ourselves anything, so I had to buy Gryffindor brooms as well. Since you already had a Nimbus 2000 from last year, it didn't even occur to me to get the rest of your team anything and so that was why it was really awkward when I realized sometime last week that my donation would seem like discrimination. Not bad for an on-the-spot cover-up. But now our advantage is gone, Draco hissed at him. Think of it this way, if you hadn't bought the team brooms, you would get flattened in every match, Harry reassured him. You saved Slytherin from a year of horribly humiliating slaughters. Draco brightened considerably at this and Harry could only imagine how long he was going to use his newfound savior of Quidditch status. Since the Slytherins really do need to break in their new brooms and our team's brooms are going to be presented at dinner tonight, I recommend that we just let them have the bloody pitch so I can go back to bed, Harry suggested. It's 10 o'clock, Harry, Hermione said, raising her eyebrows. I know, but I only got 2 hours of sleep last night. Now everyone turned to stare at Wood. What? I didn't wake them up until 5, he defended. The twins, Lee, Alicia, Katie, Angelina, and I were having a poker tournament last night that didn't end until 3, Harry explained. In order to build team solidarity, you understand. We would have asked you to join us, Wood, but we expected it to run late and you had announced at dinner that you were going to bed early. He paused. Probably because you knew that we had a ridiculously early practice this morning and couldn't be bothered to tell us. Anyway, who here thinks going back to bed sounds like a great idea? 6 hands flew in the air. I rest my case, Harry told Wood, the only one with his hand still at his side. Next time we have a practice before 9, please tell us. After all, while you have a point about the weather being unpredictable during games, we will actually know what time the game is at least a week in advance so I don't see why you can't just make an announcement the night before. With that, he turned and started heading back to the castle. Hey, mate, Ron called as he, Hermione, and Neville hurried after him. Yeah? Harry asked, not turning around. Why are you avoiding my sister? Harry froze. Avoiding, Ginny? I'm not Dash. Ron rolled his eyes. Yes you are. Every time she comes near you, you find some reason to immediately leave. Last week you even went over to sit with the Ravenclaws when she sat down across from you. Harry trailed off. He hadn't realized that he'd been avoiding Ginny, but thinking back, he supposed that was exactly what he was doing. Who could blame him, though? If he hadn't gone back, little James or Lily would be celebrating their first birthday soon. Now they might never exist. On the bright side, since the baby had not actually been born, assuming that he and Ginny got around to having children again, he wouldn't be able to miss their child as a person, just as a what might have been, and he wouldn't be subconsciously comparing his old child with his new one and hating himself all the while. And then there was Ginny herself. She didn't have the diary this time around, thank God for that, or he'd have to add that to the list of things he would never forgive himself for, beginning with abandoning Ginny and their unborn child to go through the veil, so he wasn't sure just how to break her off her hero-worshipping and get her to see him as a normal person. Particularly as he was apparently avoiding her. But it was more than just annoyance, he was dealing with Lockhart, after all, and the man's habit of mentioning how great he was approximately once every other sentence did grate on his nerves. It was uncertainty. And guilt. He fell in love with the Ginny that had held off full possession by Voldemort's Horcrux for almost a year at the age of 11, who had, despite their almost complete lack of contact, believed him without question when he insisted Voldemort was back at the age of 13, who had gone with him on his suicidal plan to save Sirius when she was 14, who had battled full-fledged Death Eaters when they invaded Hogwarts at 15, and who had co-led the Hogwarts resistance when it had fallen under Death Eater control and stayed for the final battle against all of Riddle's forces when she was 16. That was the girl he had fallen in love with. And while he would never want her to go through all of that again, he had, in fact, inadvertently already stopped the first. They all played a part in making Ginny who she was when he finally realized that she existed. While she was still the same person, he was worried that he'd end up trying to use this Ginny to replace the other Ginny that he lost, and that wasn't fair to either of them. So maybe he was avoiding her. But he had some damn good reasons. Harry could see that Ron was still waiting for an answer, and as he could never even hope to make the 12-year-old understand, he found himself latching onto one of his reasons for staying away from her last time. Though, to be fair, she was a lot better at controlling her inner fangirl than she had been the first time. I'm a little uncomfortable that your sister seems to see me as some sort of hero. I'm not, really. I'm just a guy in some pretty extraordinary circumstances, that's all. You don't mind Colin following you around, Neville pointed out. And he acts far more enthralled with you than Ginny. But Colin doesn't have a crush on me, Harry countered, crossing his arms. I'm not too sure about that. Ron muttered. Be nice, Hermione admonished, swatting at Ron. Personally, I think you're being very nice to Colin, and I'm proud of you for that. Still, you're going to have to deal with a lot of girls having crushes on you, especially when we get older. Not only are you the boy who lived, but you also attract a fair amount of attention through all of your various accomplishments and missions. I know, Harry held up his hands in surrender, too tired to continue the argument. But I don't have to deal with any of them on a regular basis, and since Ginny is Ron's sister, I do have to deal with her. But... he sighed. I'll try to stop avoiding Ginny. Happy now? 3 identical grins assured him that they were. Chapter 14. The rest of September passed remarkably quickly for Harry, who woke up every morning half expecting to hear news of an attack in the night. Hopefully petrifaction, but you never knew. Just because the possessed Ginny never managed to kill anyone didn't mean that the possessed Wormtail wouldn't. As October progressed, it looked like the first attack could very well be on Halloween again. Perhaps it wasn't a coincidence that Mrs. Norris was petrified on Halloween the first time, it was thematic. One day, about a week before Halloween, Harry was held up after breakfast by a rather concerned Percy Weasley. Not that he minded, of course. Hermione had been yelling at him ever since the owl post arrived for ordering notebook paper and actual pens. Apparently she expected him to humor the people who couldn't be bothered to use paper from a tree to write on when they could just use the skin of calves, sheep, or goats instead, and who insisted on writing with bloody feathers. Seriously, between their office supplies and their classes, Harry was beginning to think that the entire wizarding world just really hated animals. Or maybe Hermione was mad that he intended to sell some of his stock to Muggleborns and half-bloods who also preferred to live in the 20th century and not the Middle Ages. He might have also mentioned something about starting up a Hogwarts chapter of Peter. But honestly, the girl was totally overreacting. He thought she'd be pleased he was getting involved in his community given her later activities with Spew, but no. And then there was that letter she got from her parents saying that half of her neighborhood was apparently planning on dressing up in official Harry Potter costumes that he forgot to mention he authorized. Or maybe it was because he... Harry, have you seen this? Percy demanded, holding up that day's issue of the Daily Prophet and effectively bringing an end to Harry's musings on why Hermione was upset with him. Nope, Harry said cheerfully. I only read the Quibbler. I recently signed up to be their spokesperson, after all. I see, Percy said, rather taken aback. He quickly rallied, though. There is an article in here about how you donated brooms to 3 of the houses and the Malfoys donated to the last house. Harry asked. Percy nodded. Made the front page. Another nod. About damn time. I insisted that it be on the front page, but I didn't think it would take this long. They must have actually had some real news to report for once. Tell me the truth, did the story do me justice? Harry asked, looking curiously at Percy. I guess so, Percy replied. But that's not what I wanted to talk to you about. They included the price of each broom and I did the math and you spent way too much money on this. I know your parents were wealthy, Harry, you only have to provide for yourself, and you'll have free lodging until you graduate, but it's still not a good idea to burn through all of your money by then. Relax, Percy, Harry told him patronizingly. I've got that all taken care of. Befriend a leprechaun colony? Harry laughed. No, sadly leprechaun gold dies after a few hours. Dies? Percy arched an eyebrow at him. Well, the official story is missing, Harry admitted. But we all know what that means. And like I said, I've got my finances taken care of. That Daily Prophet story. Quality photos of the boy who lived apparently go for 50 galleons right now. Colin Creevy takes the pictures so he gets most of it, but I still get 20%. I get a percentage of the sales for the Quibbler, and let me tell you, subscription has really taken off, so it's a good thing I decided to get involved when I did. Also, I've authorized Harry Potter action figures and plushes, trademarked my name, and I'm currently working on developing my own clothing line. It's nothing fancy, just robes with a lightning bolt on it, but it's receiving positive feedback so far. Not to mention how much I've been getting through autographed picture sales and fan club dues. Percy just stared at him. Are you alright? Harry asked after a full 5 minutes of Percy just standing there. Yes, I'm fine, Percy said finally, shaking his head. May I ask why you're doing this? So I have money to burn, Harry said simply. Besides, if people are willing to buy anything that has my name attached to it, I might as well merchandise, right? Or at least that's what Professor Lockhart said. I'm starting to think that you spend way too much time with that man, Percy said bluntly. Maybe you're right, Harry said sadly, his shoulders hunched. I just got so excited thinking of all the ways I could help people. I guess I'll have to tell Madam Pince that I won't be making that 5,000 galleon donation after all. On the other hand, Percy said hastily. As long as you frequently consult a seasoned professional like Professor Lockhart, I'm sure your money will be fine. Harry smirked as he watched the older boy hurry away. This is bloody ridiculous, Harry complained as he followed Luna, Lockhart, Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Filch up to Lockhart's office. Luna just smiled serenely, no doubt composing an article on the events in her head. All Harry had wanted to do was enjoy the Halloween feast with his friends like not like a normal person, it was a bit late for that, but like the other students. But no, he wasn't a normal person, he was on the Quidditch team. He had tracked mud all over the Great Hall when he was coming back from practice, got yelled at by Filch for making more work for him, vanished the mud, got yelled at by Filch again for showing off, and had gotten cornered by nearly headless Nick and invited to his death stay party. Harry, who had had a miserable time at Nick's little ghost gathering, was about to decline when Luna came out of nowhere and asked if she could come, too. Nick had, of course, agreed, and so Harry was morally obligated to go to prevent Luna from deciding that she'd rather be a ghost than a girl or something else that could get her killed. Then, right when Harry had finally managed to convince Luna to at least head down to the feast for a little bit, she heard the basilisk in the walls. Luna wasn't a parcel mouth, by any means, but apparently had bat ears because she claimed that she heard hissing coming from the walls and insisted on checking it out. Unable to talk her out of it, Harry followed. And came across Mrs. Norris, petrified again, right before the other students passed by on their return to their common rooms. Consequentially, Filch had accused the two of them of killing his cat and they were on their way to defend themselves. Harry was so busy oscillating between feeling sorry for himself and feeling annoyed that despite his best intentions, he was at the heart of the Chamber of Secrets investigation again that he didn't pay any attention to the proceedings until Dumbledore informed Filch that his cat wasn't dead. Not dead, choked Filch. But why is she all stiff and frozen? Because she's been petrified, Harry explained before Dumbledore could. Is that a confession? Filch demanded angrily. Of course not, Harry said, offended. I just recognized the symptoms. And since when were you such an expert on petrifaction? Snape sneered. Since about halfway through the summer when my scar told me that the Chamber of Secrets would be opened by an unregistered rat animagus who is believed to be dead, who is being possessed by an evil diary, and that in the Chamber of Secrets there is a basilisk and looking at the basilisk would petrify a bunch of students. And Mrs. Norris, Harry added as an afterthought. Basilisks don't petrify people, Snape corrected him gleefully. They kill people. Everyone knows that. Your *** scar clearly hasn't put much thought into this. Au contraire, it's put quite a bit. While it agrees that staring directly into a basilisk's big, yellow eyes will kill you, Mrs. Norris only saw the reflection after moaning Myrtle flooded the bathroom, Harry said, smiling brightly at him. Snape pounced on that, of course. How would you know what basilisk eyes look like? No one has ever seen them and lived to tell the tale. I'm not quite sure how the fact that I'm alive implicates me in Mrs. Norris's attack, but I know because I asked Myrtle. And how would Myrtle know? McGonagall asked before Snape could say something that everyone else would regret. She was killed when the Chamber of Secrets was opened 50 years ago, Luna spoke up for the first time. We were interviewing all of the ghosts at Sir Nicholas's party and they were all so very eager to tell us how they died. I think it's a bit like old people and their grandchildren, really. You weren't at the feast because you were attending a party for ghosts? Snape asked incredulously. They don't serve anything that hasn't been rotten for at least 2 weeks. That's why we stole some sandwiches from the kitchen, Harry replied. Snape actually grinned. 20 points from Gryffindor for going to the kitchens, stealing Hogwarts food, and bothering the house elves. He doesn't bother them, Luna disagreed. They like him. In fact, they adopted him last week. Adopted? Lockhart asked blankly, the other teachers sharing his confusion for once. Oh yes. They've decided that he's an honorary house elf based on his stories of how his relatives treat him, and I must say, I am very jealous. She paused, considering. Well, about the becoming an honorary house elf, not the getting treated like one by my only family in the world. I see, McGonagall said, trying to regain her equilibrium. Miss Lovegood, since you went to the kitchens as well dash. Oh, it was all my fault, Professor, Harry said earnestly, hoping to keep her out of trouble with her housemates who she reported still thought she was odd but weren't harassing her this time around. I talked her into it. I'm a horrible influence. I knew it. Snape exclaimed. That's 10 more points from Gryffindor, Potter. Severus. McGonagall protested. That's hardly dash. Oh, it's very fair, Professor, Harry defended his sole ally among the staff. Well, in his point-losing crusade, anyway. I really should know better. Luna's only a first year. And you're only a second, McGonagall pointed out. There is no such thing as a good influence, Mr. Potter, Luna assured him. All influence is immoral because to influence a person is to give him one's own soul. The picture of Dorian Gray. Harry exclaimed delightedly. This is why you're my fourth closest friend. I quote things all the time, but no one ever recognizes it except Hermione, and she always chides me for being childish. Raxperts, Luna diagnosed. They're a pandemic, Harry agreed. Potter. Snape shouted. When Harry finally deigned to look at him, he continued, enough about your mythological creatures and your obscure Muggle literature. Tell me why you weren't at the feast. Harry stared at Snape. We already did, Professor. We went to Nick's Death Day party. We have a ton of witnesses. Of course, they're all dead, but you would be a livingist, would you? Despite the fact that Snape almost certainly knew it was a bad idea, he had to ask, livingist. Someone who judges someone based on whether they are alive or dead, Luna answered promptly. The Quibbler has been trying to bring people's attentions to these little-known prejudices, but clearly you don't subscribe, Harry elaborated. Snape's lip curled. Indeed. And why didn't you go to the feast after the party? Oh, the party's still going on. We were actually headed to the feast when we happened across Mrs. Norris, Harry said. And why didn't you come down until after the feast ended? Snape thought he had them there, but the pair actually had a very simple reason for that, and it didn't even involve any illicit activities. There were a lot of ghosts, Luna explained. Sir Nicholas invited one for every year he'd been dead, and we wanted to interview all of them. If you were on your way to join the feast, then why were you in that upstairs corridor? Snape asked logically. Why were the students returning from the feast up there if that corridor is nowhere near the Great Hall? Harry shot back. We were up there because I heard the walls hissing and I wanted to investigate, Luna said tranquilly. Harry groaned. He'd actually understood what the basilisk was saying, but wasn't planning on bringing the fact that they had heard anything up. As Ron had pointed out after the original accusation, it was better to keep the fact that he could hear the basilisk quiet. Although come to think of it, Ron was actually talking about Harry hearing voices and probably thought he was crazy. Oh well, it was the thought that counted. Dumbledore looked startled. You're a parcel mouth, Ms. Lovegood. Oh no, Luna shook her head. I didn't understand what the wall was saying, I just heard hissing. That totally lends credence to my Scars basilisk theory, just so you know, Harry couldn't resist adding. Doesn't anyone care about my cat, complained Filch. Biting his tongue to refrain from answering in the negative, Harry reached into his pocket and pulled out a vial of mandrake potion and held it out for Filch to take. What's this? He asked suspiciously as he took the vial. Some kind of poison. No, Harry assured him. I wouldn't do that. Not in front of all these witnesses, at any rate. Somehow, that did not seem to calm Filch. Strange. It's mandrake potion. It can revive Mrs. Norris. And you just happen to be carrying this around with you? Snape demanded. Headmaster, clearly Potter knows more than he's letting on. Of course I don't just happen to carry some around. But I have had 3 vials on me since the moment I stepped foot in Hogwarts this year. And I confess that I knew that at some point a basilisk was going to be set loose on the school, and you think I'm hiding something? Really? Harry asked. Harry makes some good points, Lockhart was quick to side with his marketing prodigy. And since he's clearly not responsible for this, no permanent harm was done, and Mrs. Norris will be immediately revived, why don't we let these two get back to their common rooms? An excellent idea, Dumbledore began. He knows I'm a squib. Filch burst out, interrupting the headmaster. Everyone looked at Harry. Well, okay, that one's true, but considering that I already mentioned that I'm against discriminating against people who happen to be dead, it's highly unlikely that I have a problem with people who happen to not have magic, Harry said reasonably. That's an admirable attitude, Dumbledore said, pleased once again by Harry's blatant refusal to accept the ingrained prejudices of wizarding society. Very well, off to bed, you two. Do you want to just get dinner in the kitchen since the feast is over? Harry asked as he and Luna left Lockhart's office. That sounds like a good plan, Luna agreed. And I want to see the house elves working on those chocolate pumpkins. Why are you having actual pumpkin-sized chocolate replicas delivered to everyone in the castle in the middle of the night tonight? Because this summer when I was talking about the Great Pumpkin, Cedric told me that he didn't believe in it and we made a bet about whether or not I would be able to prove its existence to him, Harry explained. That sounds an awful lot like fraud, Harry, Luna told him. It's not fraud, we're just the Great Pumpkin's helpers, Harry contradicted. Just like Santa has the elves. And now the Great Pumpkin has the house elves, Luna mused. And me, the honorary elf, Harry said smugly. Luna glared playfully at him. Isn't the Great Pumpkin from Peanuts? Do you honestly think Cedric has ever heard of Charlie Brown? I suppose not, Luna conceded. A good thing, too, because I heard that the only way to really summon the Great Pumpkin is through a satanic ritual. Harry stopped and looked at her. Luna, he said slowly. What have I told you about fact-checking? Never ever do it unless your godfather has been thrown into Azkaban without a trial? Luna guessed. Exactly. After Harry walked Luna to her common room, and thanked God once again that he wasn't a Ravenclaw as he never could figure out the riddle and that would make him the third-year Neville of Ravenclaw, he headed immediately for the Owlery. He knew he shouldn't risk getting caught out tonight of all nights and he hadn't thought to take his invisibility cloak with him to the party, a mistake, to be sure, but this was important. He had to talk to Sirius now that Pettigrew was on the move and he needed to do it soon. He quickly scrawled out, "We need to talk. Peepee has made his appearance. Name the time and place." Hedwig, he whispered, and after a moment, his large snowy owl flew to him. "Give this to Sirius, okay? Make sure he's alone and don't leave without a response." As Harry watched Hedwig fly off, he realized that things were about to get complicated. Oh joy. Chapter 15. The following morning, everyone was pleased but mystified as to why giant chocolate pumpkins with a cursory note from the Great Pumpkin wishing them a happy Halloween. As Harry went down to breakfast, Cedric called out to him. "I still don't believe you," the older boy said matter-of-factly. "Both about the Great Pumpkin and about the lengths you'd go to convince me." "You just don't want to pay up," Harry argued. "And how else do you explain that delightful and thoughtful Halloween gift?" "I'm sure I don't know," Cedric said. "But you're probably behind it. I don't know how you did it, but it was definitely you." "God, you're starting to sound like Snape," Harry muttered. "And what makes you think that I'm worthy to be the Great Pumpkin's assistant anyway?" "I don't think you're worthy to be the Great Pumpkin's assistant because the Great Pumpkin is not real," Cedric said slowly. Harry looked pained. "See if the Great Pumpkin comes to visit you next year. I bet next you'll say that you don't believe in Santa Claus." Cedric's brow furrowed. "But I don't dash." "Silence." Harry held up his hand. "I will not hear your lies. Good day." With that he walked over to the Gryffindor table and, after a moment's debate, sat down across from Ginny. He did promise he'd try, after all, he just wished she'd hurry up and get over him so he could pursue her. As convoluted as that sounded. "Hey Ginny," Harry greeted her. "Like your pumpkin?" Ginny, who had begun to blush the minute he sat down, brightened. "Aha. I'm not entirely sure that I believe in this Great Pumpkin, but if he's willing to give me massive amounts of chocolate, I guess I can play along." "That's the spirit," Harry beamed. "But don't ask Luna about it." Ginny cocked her head at him curiously and Harry remembered that since the two lived so close together they were already more or less friends. Why not? If the teachers heard some of her theories on the Great Pumpkin, they might ban any visits in future years, Harry confided. "Ah," Ginny said, as if that explained everything. When it came to Luna, it usually did. "I can't find it," Hermione complained as she slid in next to Ginny. Ron and Neville each took a place on one side of Harry. "Can't find what?" Harry asked, genuinely confused. "Both copies of Hogwarts, A History have been checked out." "I see. May I ask why in the world that book is so popular when I know for a fact that the last person before you to check it out was my mother?" Harry asked. "Everyone wants information about the Chamber of Secrets," Neville told him. "The pumpkins were a nice distraction to stop everyone from panicking, but there was still a mad library rush this morning. And Hermione made us come along with her to look for a copy. When she found out that both copies were gone, she made us look around the library like she thought Madam Pince was lying to her and was secretly stashing extra copies under the tables and in the restricted section. Boy was searching there without Madam Pince noticing fun," Ron added, shuddering. "But Hermione, don't you remember that last year I got you a copy of that exact book? Why ever do you need to check one out from the library?" Harry inquired. He vaguely remembered getting her that book the year before and, though he wasn't particularly interested in her answer, he didn't put it past some of the people who were far too interested in his life, not that he minded, this time around, to drive themselves crazy wondering about it. "With all those Lockhart books we needed, there wasn't room in my trunk for it," Hermione explained. "So I had to leave it at home." "You wasted all that space with Lockhart books but you couldn't bring Hogwarts, A History?" Ron asked, rolling his eyes. "No, you definitely don't have a crush on him." Hermione didn't blush like Ron clearly expected her to. "Wasted? Ron, those Lockhart books are our textbooks. Of course I brought them. It would make no sense to leave any of my textbooks at home so I could bring a personal reading book, particularly when the library has 2 copies and usually nobody uses them. Although this doesn't explain why you didn't carry it on with you or have it held to you," Neville pointed it out. My parents aren't comfortable with owls, Hermione explained. And I suppose it just didn't occur to me to carry it on. I can't be expected to think of everything. Why didn't you wake me? Harry asked, a little annoyed that he missed an excellent opportunity to cause chaos. Now that she mentioned it, he did distantly remember Hermione not having a copy of the book in the original timeline for those exact same reasons. We tried, Neville assured him. You started hexing us. I don't remember this, Harry said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. That's because you were still asleep, Ron said. Oh, honestly, Hermione scoffed. It's not like he sleeps with his wand under his pillow. Ginny giggled at the look on Harry's face. Well, actually, I kind of do, he corrected her. Sorry I sleep hex you guys, but I'm glad I wasn't too sleep annoyed or else you would probably still be in the hospital wing. Yeah, that's great Harry, Hermione said distractedly and with absolutely no sympathy for the suddenly wary-looking Ron and Neville. But in the meantime, how am I supposed to learn about what happened to Mrs. Norris and the Chamber of Secrets? Harry snapped his fingers. Oh, that's right, I almost forgot. Harry stood up on top of his seat and cast a quick sonorous. Attention everyone, he boomed. The students all looked at him in interest and several teachers looked mildly annoyed. No one tried to stop him, though, which was always good. Dumbledore wasn't in the Great Hall to try and censor him for the students' own good, which was better. It has come to my attention that no one except my best non-quartet friend, Harry, did his best to stop from flinching at the word quartet, which he still had a strange aversion to, Luna Lovegood, and I know what actually happened last night. This isn't because I'm famous and she's awesome, although we certainly are that. It's because we're reporters and reporters always know everything before anyone else does. After all, if we didn't, we'd be kind of unemployed. But anyway. Last night a supposedly dead parent betrayer illegal rat animagus whose name my scar is not clear on but is fairly certain rhymes with Peter Pettigrew broke into the castle, in illegal rat animagus form, and opened the Chamber of Secrets. Why would he do that? Percy asked, skeptical. Because he was possessed by an evil diary that used to belong to Tom Riddle. That's right, you heard me, Lord Bloody I am so scary no one can bear to say my name Voldemort. Harry paused to wait for the gasps to die down, kept a diary. Granted, he enchanted it to cause anyone else who writes in it to open up the Chamber of Secrets and attack people, but it's still a diary. And for that matter who writes in another person's diary? That's just kind of bizarre and definitely in bad taste. Are you saying you know what's in the Chamber of Secrets? Justin Finch Fletchley, who Harry was slightly peeved at for shunning him when Harry was over at the Hufflepuff table to talk to Cedric, asked, fear obvious in his voice. Yes, Harry said simply. Is that because you're responsible for Ernie Macmillan began? Harry, in the interest of quelling the soon-to-be rampant, especially after what he had planned for the dueling club, rumors about him being the heir of Slytherin and not letting the rather pompous Ernie steal his precious spotlight, quickly cut him off. No it is not. Trust me, if I were responsible for this I wouldn't be hiding my ability and I certainly wouldn't be petrifying people for free. Instead, I would market it. It was almost sad how convinced everyone looked at that. They wouldn't necessarily believe he would never petrify anybody, but they would believe he was that obsessed with money. He wasn't, really, it was all just a game. A test to see just how far he could use his fame before there was a backlash. There is a basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets. You can get the full story about the chamber in Hogwarts, a history, but unfortunately there is apparently a huge waiting list for the school's TWO. Those of you who don't know, a basilisk is a giant snake, the one in our school is approximately 60 feet long, that has very poisonous fangs and will kill you if you make eye contact. If you look at its reflection, you will only be petrified. Fortunately, I have a supply of mirrors, books, and mandrake potion, which will unpetrify you, on hand. The mandrake potion is free but the mirrors are 10 sickles each and the books are 5 galleons. For an extra 5 sickles, I can sign your book. That will be available after breakfast. And how do you know all of this? Justin repeated. My scar told me, Harry said. That's all you really need to know. I don't think scars work like that, Penelope Clearwater said, frowning. Who's the one with a one-of-a-kind killing curse scar, you or me? Harry asked her rhetorically. When she didn't answer, he continued. I think that makes Emmy the expert. Now, Filch's cat has already been unpetrified and while that may annoy some of you, know that this is also proof that the mandrake potion is both effective and quick, so even though the fact that the basilisk is moving through the pipes means it can appear anywhere at any time, as long as you always use a mirror to look around a corner, you should be fine. Now, who wants to buy something? Harry was immediately mobbed. Harry, are you sure this is entirely ethical? Hermione asked him later that day as they were heading over to look at the place where Mrs. Norris was petrified. Apparently someone had turned the blood-red lettering of Riddle's message neon pink. Using people's panic to make a profit and withholding potentially life-saving tools in times of crisis. Relax, Hermione, Harry told her. No one really needs Hogwarts, a history, and now that so many people are buying it, the waiting list in the library should be much more reasonable for those that can't afford it. The mirror is essential but lots of people possess handheld mirrors and just bought one from me because they are trademark Harry Potter mirrors, and for those that don't have a mirror and need one, I consulted some of the less well-off students and 10 sickles is a very reasonable price. As for profiting off of everyone's panic, well, guilty as charged. But you heard Neville. I also stopped people from panicking with my pumpkins. That was you? Ron asked, wide-eyed. Of course it was, Hermione said rolling her eyes. What did you think? There actually was a great pumpkin out there you've never heard of until today. Maybe. Hey, isn't this where all the water came from last night? Harry asked. Let's go see where it came from. All right, Hermione agreed and headed in. Ron didn't move. I can't go in there. Why not? Neville asked. That's a girl's bathroom, Ron said gruffly. Oh, grow up, Harry advised. In a couple more years you'll be begging for a reason to come in here. Besides, there are just stalls in girls' bathrooms, so it's not like you'd even see anything anyway. Looking incredibly reluctant, Ron allowed Neville and Harry to pull him into the bathroom, where, to their surprise, they found Luna trying to talk Hermione into getting a subscription to the Quibbler. She didn't appear to be making much progress. I wouldn't bother with her just yet, Luna, Harry told her. She's just not ready. Immediately, Luna's expression became much more somber. I am so sorry, she said sincerely. What do you mean you're sorry? For what? And what am I not ready for? Hermione demanded, looking a bit affronted. You're not ready for the Quibbler, Harry said. Hermione, who looked as if she were of the opinion that it was the Quibbler that was not ready for her, narrowed her eyes. Why not? Because you didn't even consider the possibility that the Great Pumpkin is real, Luna said matter-of-factly. Hermione did a double take. How do you even know that? You were debating its existence with Neville when you were in the library this morning, Luna explained. What were you doing in the library? Hermione asked, uncertain she wanted to know. Checking out 2 copies of Hogwarts, a history, Luna replied brightly. Harry laughed. I love you, Luna, I really do. Hermione could only gape wordlessly and with not a little outrage at the blonde Ravenclaw. She had spent 3 hours looking for a copy, after all. Seeing this, Neville quickly stepped in. So, why does that disqualify Hermione from being Quibbler material? Luna gave him an amused look. If you can't even entertain that notion, then you will not be able to handle some of our more interesting news. What are you even doing here, Luna? Harry asked conversationally. I was doing a follow-up interview with Myrtle here, Luna said, gesturing towards the ghost who had until that point been hiding in one of the toilets. Seeing as how she left so abruptly last night after Peeves started teasing her. You really shouldn't let him get to you like that, Harry added. He's just bitter that the ghosts won't accept him because he's not technically dead and he has no purpose but to cause as much havoc as possible. Now, while Fred, George, and I may think that that is a noble mission, I'm sure being completely isolated at all times since the beginning of your existence must get a little frustrating at times, and so he took it out on you. He can't really do anything about the isolation, either, because just imagine what would happen if there were to be 2 poltergeists at Hogwarts. Everyone took a moment to contemplate that and quickly realized that Harry was right and that must never, ever be allowed to happen. I know, Myrtle admitted. But sometimes he just gets to be too much. I mean, I was killed right at the height of puberty, so not only am I eternally bespectacled and acne-ridden, but I'm hormonal as hell and liable to cry at the drop of a hat. I am so sorry, Harry told her honestly. Not to mention I was on my period at the time. Harry could only wince. He'd had plenty of second-hand experience with PMS. Wow. That sucks. I'm sorry. Myrtle nodded. Thank you. Now if you'll excuse me, I think I'm about to cry for no reason I can think of, so I'd like to be alone now. Bye, Luna said waving. Thanks for the interview. Ron. Percy Weasley shouted the minute they emerged from the bathroom. That's a girl's bathroom. What were you dash? Ron's considering a sex change, Harry said seriously. He's still undecided, so we're showing him all the differences there will be if he ever goes through with it, and going to the girls' bathroom instead of the boys will definitely be one of them. Percy opened and closed his mouth a few times but no sound came out. You prat, Ron snorted at Harry. I am not. Thank God, Percy said, relieved. I don't even want to think about how I would explain how you became Ronnie to Mother. But as a prefect, I'm still obligated to ask what you were doing in there. Harry began, but Ron shot him a glare. I'll handle this, if you don't mind, Ron took a deep breath. We went to go stare at the pink writing and then Harry decided to go investigate why the girls' bathroom flooded, and when I said that I couldn't go in there he assured me that once puberty hit I'd be singing a different tune, and when we got in there, Harry's friend Luna was interview-moaning Myrtle. Myrtle got depressed, and we left. Percy blinked. No, really, why were you in there? That's what happened, Ron insisted. I swear I must be getting old, Percy muttered. Do you have any idea how this looks? Coming back here when everyone else is down at dinner. So nobody will see us up here, Harry shrugged. Besides, everyone's been coming up to stare at the wall all day. There's really not much to do around here. Hogwarts is surprisingly dull as far as magical schools go. It is not. Hermione and Percy exclaimed, scandalized, simultaneously. You know, at Durmstrang the Forbidden Forest isn't a detention waiting to happen, it's a rite of passage. And 1/3 of Beauxbaton's students aren't fully human. Imagine how exciting those schools must be on a day-to-day basis, Harry said dreamily. We have a basilisk, that's exciting, Ron said defensively. Not really, it's only attacked a cat. At Hogwarts we need Voldemort himself to come and liven things up despite the fact that he's dead, Harry replied. Oh honestly, Ron, it's just a name, Hermione said exasperated as the boy had flinched upon hearing Riddle's alias. This time, Harry had taken great pains to ensure that Hermione never succumbed to ridiculous wizarding practices of refusing to actually refer to Voldemort as anything but he who must not be named or you-know-who. After all, if they called him he who must not be named then they were, in fact, naming him, and what if people didn't know who? How can you-know-who be causing problems if he's dead? Percy asked, frowning. Is he a ghost? No, he's just mostly dead, Harry explained. Mostly dead. Neville repeated. What's the difference? There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead. Now, mostly dead is slightly alive. Now, all dead, well, with all dead, there's usually only one thing that you can do, Luna said, grinning. Go through his clothes and look for loose change, Harry finished. I love Princess Bride. You know, he said, turning to his three best friends. I don't know what it is, but lately Luna's been beating you guys in the friends department hands down. It's not our fault we're not insane, Hermione said, crossing her arms. No offense, Luna. Why would I be offended? Luna asked. I've seen your version of sanity. It bores me. Hey, why were you up here? Neville asked. Isn't that as suspicious as us being up here, even if you're a prefect? In fact, I'd say it's even more suspicious as you're old enough to conceivably know how to petrify someone and we aren't. Percy began, turning very red. Oh, he was probably just off making out with Penelope Clearwater, his girlfriend, Harry guessed. Just go down to dinner, Percy said hastily, shaking his head and hurrying away. Chapter 16. After making a quick stop at the Room of Requirements to pick up Ravenclaw's diadem, Harry stuck out to the Shrieking Shack to meet Sirius. Whomtells back. Sirius cut right to the chase. Harry nodded. I think so. At any rate, the Chamber of Secrets has been opened and Mrs. Norris was petrified. Mrs. Norris. Sirius looked confused. Is that Filch's new cat? At Harry's nod, Sirius grinned. Excellent. I guess he's not all bad, after all. I mean, I will still attack him on sight, but at least I have this to mitigate the betrayal. You do realize that Pettigrew's being possessed by Voldemort, right? Harry asked. So really he petrified Mrs. Norris. Sirius looked speculative. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but maybe Voldemort isn't Dash. Oh, don't even go there, Harry interrupted. And besides, I unpetrified her almost immediately. Sirius looked thunderstruck and not a little horrified. Why would you do something so heinous? Harry rolled his eyes. Look, Sirius, I get that you don't like Filch or any of his cats Dash. That the understatement of the year, Sirius muttered. They are pure evil. But look at it from my perspective. I purchased quite a bit of mandrake potions during the summer and if I didn't prove that they worked on the cat, no one else would have trusted me to use it on them given they thought I was the heir of Slytherin at the time, Harry pointed out. I guess I see your point, Sirius said reluctantly. But Merlin, Harry, only Lily was that prepared that she stocked up on cures for potential disasters. Harry snorted. To be fair, she did spend prolonged periods of time with you and your friends. Details, Sirius said dismissively. His eyes widened. Wait, they thought you were the heir of Slytherin. Harry nodded. As in they don't anymore? Another nod. Details. I merely convinced them that I would have found some way to market my powers of petrifaction if I actually had any and apparently I've been spending so much time with Lockhart that they believe me, Harry explained, shrugging. And let me tell you, I am really loving this whole not being suspected of attacking the Muggleborns despite my mother and best friend's status as Muggleborn. There are no words for that, Sirius said, shaking his head in awe. I know, I'm amazing, Harry said smugly. But on to business, I retrieved the diadem Horcrux from the Room of Requirements, can I assume you've mastered Fiendfire? Sirius winced. For the most part. Sirius. What? Don't get me wrong, I can definitely destroy the Horcruxes with it and more or less aim it, it just takes me a little while to put it out. Dear God, Harry said, slightly annoyed. You've had 3 months. That's a lot of progress, I don't think you quite appreciate just how difficult Fiendfire is to master, Sirius defended. Remembering the first time he's seen it in action in a move that all at once destroyed one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, cost Crabbe his life, and made Draco forever indebted to him, Harry shook his head. No, you're right. I'm sorry, it's just uncontrollable fire on Hogwarts grounds. This sounds like a very bad idea. Sirius shrugged. Meh, it probably is, but at least there is very little risk of lycanthropy, unlike some of our other exploits. There is that, Harry agreed. So is that all you've been doing all this time? Learning Fiendfire? Not quite. I also anonymously sold Creature, don't even ask, to the Greengrassers, found what I believe to be the Locket Horcrux, and have been sending Remus letters twice a week. He hasn't actually answered any of them, but at least he hasn't turned them over to the Aurors, Sirius told Harry. Well, that's something, I guess. And let me see that locket. When Sirius handed it to him, Harry carefully inspected it. Yes, this is definitely it. You should have at least told Creature you were going to destroy this before you sold him. He's not that bad, really. Sirius snorted. I'll believe it when I see it. You never will now, you up and sold him. Harry exclaimed. He had his chance. I put up with him for a whole week before I resorted to drastic measures, Sirius shot back. How generous, Harry said wryly. Why would he care about the locket anyway? Sirius asked disinterestedly. Or is he just obsessed with any dark pureblood relic? Because your brother gave his life to steal it from Voldemort, an entrusted creature with its destruction right before he died. Harry suggested. Sirius just stared at him, gaping. Did I forget to mention that this summer? Harry asked sheepishly, rubbing the back of his neck. Yes, I believe you did, Sirius said once he found his voice. My little brother, working to bring down Voldemort and discovering about the Horcruxes. He probably thought Voldemort only had one, but still, I never would have thought. After giving Sirius a moment to collect himself, Harry placed the diadem and the locket on the floor of the Shrieking Shack. Well, shall we? Once the cup joined its fellow dark objects on the ground, Sirius cast Fiendfire and burned down the entire building and surrounding area. It wasn't very practical, perhaps, but it was certainly cathartic. Harry. Ron pulled Harry into an unused classroom. Why are you kidnapping me? Harry asked, eyeing Hermione and Neville, who were already in the room, suspiciously. We are not kidnapping you, Hermione said, rolling her eyes. So you'll let me leave this room right now? Harry asked, heading for the door. Sorry, mate, but you have to hear us out first, Ron told him, blocking the exit. I repeat, why are you kidnapping me? Harry asked again. Because you have a tendency to be overly dramatic and get everyone involved with things, and we need to keep this quiet, Hermione explained. Plus you're not going to like what they came up with, Neville added. What they came up with? Harry repeated. You mean you don't agree? Nope, Neville said cheerfully. Because unlike them, I actually have some modicum of faith in you. Modicum? Ron looked confused. Some small measure, Hermione supplied automatically. And we have plenty of faith in Harry. Harry and Neville both looked at her skeptically. She flushed. What? Just because I'm not willing to accept everything that comes out of your mouth doesn't mean I don't have faith in you. For God's sake, last week you told Percy Ron wanted a sex change. I don't see your point, Harry told her bluntly. Oh, never mind, Hermione said, irritated. Now, while I'm not saying that I doubt your, Scar's expert knowledge of the attacks, I am suggesting that perhaps what was it? Supposedly dead illegal rat animagus dash. The supposedly dead illegal parent betraying rat animagus, Harry corrected. Right, him, Hermione agreed absently. He probably has some help in the castle. While Professor Dumbledore doesn't always have the most inspired hiring practices, the defense against the dark arts teacher is usually the only one that ever gives anyone any trouble, and Lockhart doesn't really seem the type to pull something like this. Which is why we think it's Malfoy, Ron continued. Harry looked at their serious faces for a moment before promptly bursting out laughing. Oh, so that's how it is? Hermione asked angrily. You can entertain notions of great pumpkins and garden gnome conspiracies but not take attacks on the school seriously. With great effort, Harry managed to quell his laughter. Sorry, Hermione, I am taking you seriously, but, really? Draco? How did you come to that conclusion? We know he thinks Muggleborns are scum and said you'll be next, Mudbloods, when he saw the writing on the wall on Halloween, Ron said as if it were obvious. Had Harry really been that quick to jump to conclusions back then? That was quite a depressing thought. What more do you need? Proof? Harry suggested. Beside him, Neville groaned. Oh, you really should not have said that. Harry was puzzled. Why not? They have a plan to make Polyjuice Potion so we can sneak into the Slytherin common room, pose as Crabbe and Goyle, and ask him directly if he's responsible. Blatantly ignoring the fact that no one in their right mind would confide in those two, they also want to steal some of the ingredients to make the potion from Snape's private supply by blowing up a cauldron, potentially hurting and or killing anyone in the immediate area depending on what we're making and if they swallow any of the potion. As a diversion, Neville said, shaking his head. I told them that not even you would go for that. Of course not, Harry said, shocked. That kind of safety risk is just unacceptable. What's the good of finding out that Draco's involved and stopping a few couple hour petrifactions if we get half of the first-year Gryffindors and Slytherins killed? Then find a different way for us to get the ingredients, Hermione said determinedly. Because one way or another, we're doing this. If there is any chance at all that Malfoy is involved, we have to find out. I know he's your friend and all, but look at this objectively, Dash. I am, Harry retorted. You two are the ones blinded by your hatred of him. I'll order your damn potion, but I'm telling you, it's not him. How do you know? Ron demanded. Just because he's nice to you doesn't mean that, Dash. I know, Harry interrupted again. But how could he possibly be the heir of Slytherin? His mother is a black and there are a lot of people with black blood running around even if Sirius is the only living wizard to have that name. Maybe your godfather is the heir of Slytherin. Ron had a new theory. Why would my fugitive godfather break into Hogwarts just to set a snake on people? There are much more efficient ways to kill people. You said the culprit was being possessed by an evil diary, Neville, who was quickly becoming the voice of reason, reminded him. Harry glared witheringly at him. Thanks so much for that. I try. My godfather would never write in a diary. He thinks having a diary automatically reduces your badass status by 20%, Harry explained. How would you know that? Hermione asked. Harry smirked and opened his mouth. And if you say your scar told you, then so help me, she threatened. Harry shrugged. Then I've got nothing. Another point in Draco's favor, Professor Snape is not a parcel mouth. What does that have to do with anything? Hermione asked exasperatedly. Because parseltongue is a hereditary trait. If Professor Snape can't speak it and thus can't possibly be the heir, then how could Draco? Harry asked innocently. There's always the possibility that Malfoy is, in fact, a Malfoy, Ron spoke up. Harry stared at him uncomprehendingly. Fine, don't help us, Hermione sniffed. Ron and I can do it by ourselves since we're clearly the only ones taking the safety of this school seriously. Will you at least buy us the potion? Sure, Harry agreed. Just make sure that the hair actually comes from the person you want to transform into and not their cat. What dash? Hermione began. Don't worry about it. Now, as you two are clearly nuts, Neville and I are off to find Luna. Mr. Potter, McGonagall called as Harry was heading into the castle after a Quidditch practice. She looked unusually grim. Yes? Harry asked politely, wondering what he could have possibly done to upset her that she knew about. He drew a blank. Another student has been found petrified, so if you could take some mandrake potion up to the hospital wing, that would be much appreciated, McGonagall told him. Sure, I can go now, Harry agreed as he followed her up to the hospital wing. Who is it, anyway? You probably don't know him, but it is a Hufflepuff named Zacharias Smith, the Transfiguration professor informed him. Harry threw back his head and groaned. Can't we just leave him like... Mr. Potter? McGonagall sounded appalled. 20 points from Gryffindor for your callous remarks. Yes. Harry cheered. Mr. Potter? Harry. Draco shouted the minute he saw him. Whoops, Harry said, cursing himself for letting himself get caught. He'd been so diligent avoiding Draco recently and now it appeared that his luck was coming to an end. Now that I finally managed to corner you after 2 months, would you care to explain this? Draco demanded, chucking a rather thick book at his head. After it hit him, Harry picked it up and glanced down at it. It would appear to be Professor Lockhart's autobiography Magical Me. Why? Did you forget how to read or go blind or something? No, I did not, Draco growled. Have you seen the section on my parentage? No, I haven't, Harry answered truthfully. After all, he hadn't bothered to read Lockhart's books as he was always forced to pay attention in class when Lockhart made him help reenact different scenes. Unlike last time, though, he didn't mind, his already top-notch acting skills were rapidly improving under all the different parts he had to play. Not everyone is obsessed with your parentage, Draco. He devoted an entire chapter to how the touching story of my mother's love affair with Professor Snape changed his life. Draco yelled. Your mother had a love affair with Professor Snape? Harry repeated wide-eyed. No, she didn't, Draco scowled. But you just said Harry began. Lockhart heard that ridiculous rumor you made up, believed it, published it, and now all of his mindless fangirls will believe it and this will never end, Draco complained. I hope you're happy. I'm always happy, Harry said blithely. And I don't see how you can possibly blame me. I mean, sure, I started the rumor, but I only mentioned it the one time, Fred and George did all the rest. And that time at the bookstore over the summer when you wanted to avoid getting your picture taken, Draco pointed out. And those are only the times I know about. Okay, Harry conceded. Only the 2, then. But, really, it's not my fault. You said it right in front of him. Draco pointed out. You know, Harry said, crossing his arms. This is why I've been avoiding you. Just stop spreading the rumors, okay? Draco entreated. Sooner or later, someone will mention it to my father. He hasn't heard already? Harry asked, surprised. But it's been months. And he was in the bookstore the second time I said it. No one really wants to upset my father by implying my mother was cheating on him with a close friend of his, Draco explained. A lot of people are scared of him and his money. I'm not really sure why he didn't catch that incident in the bookstore, but he was kind of preoccupied that day. I'm really not sure why. I'll make an honest effort, Harry promised. Draco sighed. I guess that's the most I can hope for. Chapter